Butty Boy is the Reluctant Fellrunner. Season 2, Episode 13. Freckles and Curles. JB opened up the scout hut. As usual at this time of year, a wave of warm, musty air came out to greet him. The wood pulp walls of the scout hut were perfect for breeding mould. He imagined taking the section of wall down and finding giant fungus and mushrooms growing there. He propped open the front doors to let out the musty smell and went to open the fire exit at the other end of the building to let the room ventilate. Can't be doing me any good breathing this in, he thought for the umpteenth time. Wilson had rung him after the trip to the Cowgirls' Fells and asked for an extra meeting, saying that they had all had such a wonderful time, that they had time on their hands in the evenings, and could we all get together to discuss the trip to the lakes at the weekend, rather than having backwards and forwards telephone conversations.
Besides, it's far more civilised,
he'd said. Camo arrived and came bounding in on giant strides.
It seems like Wilson's got the fell running bug and couldn't wait until the weekend,
he said. Something like that, said JB. He's obviously got something on his mind.
Oh,
said Camo.
What do you think it is?
JB shrugged. He seemed excited about something, he said. Thomas came wandering in with his mum. She was carrying a tray and a big smile. JB was pleased to see Thomas more confident and relaxed, not so shy about the club, and not embarrassed to be with his mum. I bought some flapjack, she said. Oh, you shouldn't have, said JB politely. Before he could get there, Camo had stridden across and taken the tray.
Ooh, flapjack,
said Camo.
Thanks, Mrs. T.
Help yourself, Camo, she said, and call me Fiona.
Fiona,
said Camo, smelling the tray of flapjack.
OK, Mrs. T.
He went to put the tray in the centre of the table, the wonderful symmetry of it, already broken by the large corner piece he was pushing into his mouth.
Oh, I love the bits at the edge where it's just a bit crunchier,
said Camo, speaking around the piece of flapjack in his mouth.
Thanks, Mrs. T.
She smiled, satisfied and happy. I like to see a man who enjoys his food, she said. Well, you can't go wrong with Camo on that front, said JB. She watched Camo for a moment, smiling, and then turned to JB and put on a slightly more serious face. Can I have a word with you? She said. Of course, he said. He walked over to a quieter corner, and she followed him over. I'd just like to thank you and the club for what you are doing for my Thomas, she said, a combination of upset and happy. Well, there's no need to thank us, said JB. We're more than happy to have him. He's certainly a great runner, very good in fact, better than the rest of us. But he's a nice lad too. He's a credit to you. Oh, thank you for saying that, she said. It means a lot to hear you say it. I have noticed a big difference in him. He's more relaxed and... She searched for the right words. Mature? Said JB. Yes, that's it, she said. He suddenly seems more grown up. Not physically, but in himself. It's like he's more content with the world, not so angry anymore. Good, said JB. You know, he made me a cup of tea the other day in bed, she said. I didn't know he knew how. I think he must have learned that with you. I didn't even ask him. You know, the other day... She broke up a bit and dabbed a tear. He actually said, "Thanks, Mum, for everything you do for me. I know it's been hard for you with Dad gone and I've not helped. I do love you, Mum." I can't tell you what that meant. I know it's since he's been coming here. He just suddenly seems to have found his place in the world. "Well, that's nice," said JB. "He's still not opened up about his dad, though," she said. "Does he need to?" said JB. She was surprised at a new thought. "No, I don't suppose he does," she said. "As long as he's happy, I guess not." JB smiled. She thought for a moment. "Oh dear," she said at a sudden new thought. "What?" smiled JB. "All this time I thought he was hurting me, not talking about his dad, when it's been me hurting him, hasn't it? Me constantly questioning him has been torturing him, hasn't it?" JB laughed. That's probably a bit harsh on yourself," he said. "He obviously knows you mean well." She almost didn't hear what he said. "Oh, that's a relief, actually, knowing it's me that's the problem and not him," she said. Of course he just wanted to get out running, doing something he enjoyed with some friends. Why would he want to dwell on it? That's what I've been doing. He had the right idea all along. Get out and get happy. I have a friend who keeps asking me out to different clubs, and I keep putting her off, saying I had to stay and look after Thomas, when all I was doing really was moping about the house depressed and dragging Thomas down too. I'm going to do what Thomas has done and get myself out." "Good for you," laughed JB. "I'm going to go home and give her a ring right now," she said decisively. "Good," said JB as she turned to leave. "And thanks again for the flapjack." He followed her towards the door. Thanks," said Camor around a mouthful that might be his second piece. At the door she turned. "Oh, those students have not arrived yet," said Thomas's mother to JB. "I was hoping to get a good look at one of them. Thomas has talked about her a lot. I think he's quite smitten with her. What was her name again?" "Tonka?" said JB. "No, I don't think so," she said. "I'd remember something unusual like that." "Betty?" said JB. "That's it," she said. "Betty." JB smiled. Just then the 4 students came noisily into the room. "She's the quiet girl at the back with the blue headband," said JB, nodding in Betty's direction, and Thomas's mother strained her neck to get a good look at her.
"Oh, Flapjack!"
said Keppel, walking enthusiastically across.
"No, Keppel,"
said Tonka sharply.
"We've not had our dinner yet, and if you have that it will spoil your appetite." "I suppose so,"
said Keppel, looking at the tray of flapjack with itchy fingers.
"Oh, how lovely, Flapjack,"
said Wilson, coming up.
"Is it for everyone to share?"
Yeah, said JB. "Thomas's mother made it and brought it in."
"Oh, that's so kind of you,"
said Wilson, stepping forward.
"We haven't had our dinner yet,"
said Tonka, her words stopping him in his tracks.
"Oh, yes, of course,"
said Wilson.
"I wonder if just a little slice would,"
said Keppel. Tonka shot him a glare, and he did not finish the sentence.
"Oh, I know,"
said Wilson.
"Why don't we nip down to the chip shop at the corner of the street? We said we were going to try a northern chippy while we were up here. We could kill 2 birds with 1 stone. My treat, everyone!
Oh yes, good-o, said Keppel. Tonka gave them both hard stares, but their enthusiasm was overwhelming, and she quickly changed tack. I'll come with both of you, she said. Do you think they will do a vegetarian sausage?
No bloody chance,
said Camo around a mouthful of flapjack. Wilson and Keppel were already edging towards the door before Tonka could put them off.
Nice to meet you,
said Wilson.
Does anyone want anything? My treat!
No thanks, said JB. I've already eaten. Thomas shook his head.
You could get an extra portion of chips for everyone to share,
said Camo.
It'll mean you get to eat all your own. Oh, good idea,
said Wilson.
And I've a good idea of my own to share. I'll mention it when we are back.
Wilson had a quiet word with Betty in passing and gave her a peck on the cheek. She then went to go into the little kitchen to get the drinks ready. Betty, said JB, stopping her, this is Thomas's mum. Call me Fiona, she said, offering her hand. Betty flushed a little but took the hand. Hello, she said. Nice to meet you. Betty had her first trip into the Fells earlier this week, said JB. Oh, that's nice, said Thomas's mother. How did you find it? Steep, she said. Very steep. Yes, Thomas said it was steep. He said it was enjoyable, though. He said you were very good for your first go. Betty, isn't it? She said. Oh, no, said Betty with a little laugh, looking at JB. I was rubbish. But your Thomas is excellent. The two women stood there, and Betty became confused by Thomas's mother staring at her with a big smile on her face. I'd better get the drinks ready, she said. OK, my dear, says Thomas's mum. Nice to meet you. Betty nodded shyly and walked off. What a nice girl, said Thomas's mum, a little confused. Having seen the two of them, I would have thought he would have taken a shine to Tonka. She's a beautiful girl. Sharp-tongued, mind. I'm glad he's seen past that. JB looked at her and smiled. Oh, I know she has a boyfriend and is too old for him, but it's nice to see the type he's going for, she said. She is a nice girl, said JB. Oh, to be young and in love, said Thomas's mother with a nostalgic sigh. She started to walk out and gave a little wave. Don't forget to ring your friend, said JB. Oh, yes, she said. JB followed Betty into the small kitchen area. How come it's always us two making the brews? He said. She looked over her shoulder at him and smiled in her slow, deliberate way. I don't mind, she said. He was waiting patiently behind her. It was a warm evening, and he noticed the wide neck top she had on had slipped down off one of her shoulders. The shoulder was shapely and attractive. Her skin was white as milk, and her shoulder was covered in tiny little mustard-coloured freckles. They formed a tide line like the stars in the Milky Way. Gosh, you're freckly, he said. She turned and looked at him like he had given her an electric shock. What makes you say that? She said. Your shoulder is covered in them, he said. She pulled the top up over her shoulder, but it immediately wanted to slip down again. The neck was so wide. I knew I shouldn't have worn this top, she said, turning back to make herself busy at the sink. He thought about it. Betty, under your makeup, Are you quite freckly? He said. She looked at him horrified. Why do you say that? She said, not denying or admitting it. What's wrong with Freckles? He said. I don't know why it's become a thing to have straight hair and no freckles. Curly hair and freckles, that's what I say. She looked at him like she did not believe him. Don't be daft. No one likes freckles, she said seriously. Wilson hates them. I like freckles, he said. She was more surprised than anything, but her face said she did not believe him. He had a sudden thought, and even before he said it, he knew it was true. That girl on the stairs, he said hesitatingly. You said she was teasing you. She was teasing you about your red hair and your freckles, wasn't she? Betty's hands stopped washing the pots, and she stood up straight. She turned quickly around, her face angry. He thought she was going to scream and shout at him, but she broke, and suddenly she started to shake. Oh God, I'm so sorry, said JB. He stepped forward and put his hands on her upper arms, and she came forward into him. She was crying into his shoulder, sobbing and shaking. He put his arms around her and squeezed her tightly, while waves shook through her. JB felt a double pang of guilt. He had prompted her reaction, and here he was, trying not to think how wonderful she was to hold. It's okay, he said. That's all in the past now. Gradually, the waves shaking her came to a stop. She stayed there for half a minute, not moving, her head on his shoulder and arms around his waist. She felt smaller than he imagined. She finally broke away from him, and part of him was reluctant to let her go. She leaned on the kitchen sink and dabbed at her eyes in that practiced way girls do. They said such horrible things, she said in a flat voice. Kids can be so nasty, he said. But that's in the past now. It doesn't have to be with you here and now. I'm trying, she said. I am trying. I think I am getting better. Of course, he said. She pulled a tissue out of her pocket. I bet I look a right mess, she said. Yeah, he said, and she laughed. I'd better sort this makeup out, she said, but she did not move. This is going to sound a bit weird, he said, but I'd love to see your freckles with your red hair down. Really? She said. The freckles and the red hair are my last hurdle now. Of course, he said. And imagine all those freckly red-haired children you're going to have. Oh God, she said. He laughed. Do you really like freckles? She said. Yes, I do, he said. You don't understand, she said. There's freckles, and then there's freckles. He shrugged. I like freckles, he said. She thought about it. Promise you won't laugh, she said. Of course not, he said seriously. She got up from leaning on the sink and nearly sat back down. Oh, I had a flash of childhood trauma there. You sure you won't laugh? She said. And what about the others? I'll go and warn them, he said with exaggerated seriousness. And if anyone laughs, I'll smash their faces in. She laughed, and then he could see her thinking. He saw her face settle on a conclusion. Okay, but I'm putting it straight back on again after, before Wilson gets back," she said. "Whatever you want," said JB. She went off to the bathroom, almost clutching herself with her own arms around her and her shoulders hunched in. He went and sat down with Camo and Thomas. Listen, guys, Betty is going to take her makeup off and let her hair down. She's embarrassed about her freckles, so don't laugh, whatever you do," he said. Camo looked worried.
"Oh, you shouldn't have said don't laugh. That's set my mind thinking of it now. And what if she looks a bit of a freak? What if I burst out laughing?" he said. "Sometimes I can't control it. It used to get me in so much trouble at school, particularly in Basher Burton's class. Worse was, if we went to church with school, you had to walk up the streets holding hands with someone while the teachers shouted for you to get across the road quick, and me roaming the streets by myself years before that. The only reason it was funny was because all the adults were taking it so seriously like, and telling you to be quiet. I'm sure I've got a bit of Tourette's, you know. Sometimes I think something, and before I can stop myself, I've gone and done it. Yeah, there was nothing so funny at school as going to church. All the days leading up to it, you would be dreading it, and dreading having to hold hands with a girl. And then when it came to it, I loved it."
"Just do your best," said JB. "She's really self-conscious about them, and her red hair."
"Anyway, why would you laugh?" said Thomas seriously. "I've got freckles and no one laughed at me over them."
"Yeah, but there's Freckles," said Camo. "And she's got the red hair too."
"You'll just have to hold it in," said JB. "It seems to be a big thing for her. I hope I've not pushed her into doing something she didn't want to do."
"I think she wants to do it," said Thomas. "She could have just said no."
"You'd like her if she was covered head to toe in mud," said Camo.
Thomas just smiled. JB turned and looked at the closed bathroom door. It seemed to be taking longer than expected.
"Is she having second thoughts, do you think?" said Camo. "How long does it take a girl to take foundation off?"
"I'd better see if she's all right," said JB. "Tell her she doesn't have to do it if she doesn't want to." JB went over to the closed bathroom door. He listened. All was silent. "Are you okay in there, Betty?" he said. "You don't have to do it if you don't want to, you know. It was just a quick idea." "It's okay. I'm ready now," she said. "I didn't think I would be this nervous. Silly, really. Promise you won't laugh." "Cross my heart," he said in a serious voice. She opened the door quickly to get it over with, and was suddenly stood there framed by the doorway. A blue jeans torn jacket with a white cotton top underneath. Simple clothes that used to be working men's clothes. And then, in absolute contrast, cascading copper red curly hair to her shoulders, green eyes, and so many freckles they could not be counted. It was a moment caught in time. She was stood there staring at him with questioning eyes. JB felt a peculiar pressure in his eardrums. Betty had a frown and a concerned face that softened into a wry smile. JB felt something strange had gone on, and his mind replayed the last few seconds. He suddenly realised someone had involuntarily said, "Wow," out loud. And then he realised that that someone was him. He felt a wave of embarrassment rise up, and then he realised he did not mind, was even pleased to give her that real moment of truth, and the embarrassment faded to nothing. I bet I look a right sight, she said, looking down shyly.
You certainly do, said JB. She flashed him a frowning glare and then realised what he meant, and she smiled.
Should I put the foundation back on then, and the headscarf? She smiled.
Don't you bloody dare, said JB in an exaggerated way, and she laughed. Come on, he said, pointing the way to everyone else. Out you come, out with you. She walked through to the room. Camo and Thomas were chit-chatting and pleasantly laughing about something. Gentlemen, here's Freckles, said JB. Betty looked shocked and gave him a stern look and looked back at everyone, blushing and shy. The room went silent. Thomas and Camo were both staring with shocked faces. Betty looked at JB, puzzled, wondering if the silence was good or bad. Well, what do you think? Said JB, knowing and smiling. Camo got up and came across. His face was all serious. He took hold of both of Betty's shoulders with his giant hands and twisted her a little clockwise and then anti-clockwise and looked at her face with a puzzled expression.
That's proper weird,
he said.
It's Betty and it's not Betty. I can't picture the old Betty now.
Oh my God, she said. Is it that bad?
What?
Said Camo, still looking at her.
Are you kidding? You look absolutely bloody gorgeous.
She shook her head as if it was a ridiculous thing he had said, but she could not help an enormous smile.
What do you think, young Thomas?
Said Camo, finally letting go of Betty's shoulders and standing away so he could see better. Yeah, good, yeah, he said, going red.
Good?
Scoffed Camo.
What are you talking about, Thomas? She's an absolute babe.
Betty blushed, but most of the praise went over her head. It was silent, with everyone staring at her. JB thought it had been an incredible transformation, with her hair down and the freckles out, and everything being its correct, natural colour. The shape of her nose, the high, sharp cheekbones, the point of her chin, all made sense now and came together correctly. The red hair, the freckles, the green and hazel eyes were unforgiving. Unforgiving, unless perfect. JB thought back to the girl teasing her on the stairs at school. If only she could have known they were teasing her because they were jealous, he thought.
You think the freckles and the hair are okay then?
She said, still unsure. She was not looking for a compliment. She was trying to lay a ghost to rest that had been haunting her.
I have always thought about possibly going back, but I was worried I'd look different, she said.
Of course you look different,
said Camo.
But in a good way. We're going to have to start calling you Hot Betty from now on.
She bowed her head in embarrassment. It was wonderful to see the expression on her face and to watch her blossoming. No one could take their eyes off her. They could hear the others coming in, and the confidence drained from Betty's face. Wilson came through the door carrying a bag from the chip shop. He stopped when he saw her.
Oh, Betty, what are you doing?
He said.
Why have you got your hair down? And the freckles. Oh no, not the freckles. I thought we'd agreed you'd cover them up.
Keppel and Tonka came through behind him and stopped. Tonka had an evil smile on her face, enjoying Betty's embarrassment. Keppel looked down at his bag of food going cold. Betty's face fell and she shot off to the bathroom. All eyes turned to Wilson in a whirl of fury.
"Whoa, steady on, Wilson,"
said Camor.
"Are you nuts? Those Freckles are amazing!"
"You can't say that,"
said Thomas, quietly but firmly.
"What do you mean?"
said Wilson. "Well, I thought you were all about things being natural and back to nature," said JB. "What's more natural than curly hair and freckles?"
"Oh, what, you really like them?"
said Wilson.
"I thought nobody liked Freckles. I thought she wanted to cover them up herself. I was being supportive."
It was awkward and quiet, and everyone looked around, wondering how to get out of the mess. "Hands up for curly hair and freckles," said JB. Camo, Thomas and JB's hands went straight up. Wilson looked round at Keppel and Tonka. Keppel shrugged and put his hand up, thinking it was the quickest way to get to his food. Reluctantly, Tonka followed the vote to not stand out, biding her time to pull legs off spiders and wings off flies.
"Oh, I didn't realise,"
said Wilson. He put the bag from the chip shop down and went after Betty. Keppel shrugged and sat down.
"Better not let these get cold,"
he said, getting his food out. "I'll go and make the brews," said JB. He had just finished making them and Thomas came up.
"I'll give you a hand carrying them back,"
he said, picking up some of the mugs. "Cheers, Thomas," said JB. He looked back at the table. Betty and Wilson were back. Betty had her hair covered up by the blue scarf, and her freckles had disappeared under pale foundation makeup. Wilson kept looking across at Betty, but she did not meet his glances. "How awkward is it out there?" said JB.
"Very,"
said Thomas with a sigh. "Come on," said JB, setting off back with 2 hands full of mugs.
"Do we have to?"
said Thomas. "Come on," JB laughed. As they approached, Camel, Wilson and Keppel made a fuss of thanks for the brews to try to improve the atmosphere. Betty said a 1 word of thanks. Tonka was sat back in her chair with a big grin, her leg bobbing happily, soaking up her enjoyment of the scene. "Oh, you said you had some idea, Wilson," said JB.
"Oh, yes, of course, I forgot,"
said Wilson.
"How silly of me. I was wondering if we could make a night of it Saturday night and stay over at the Slag Heap Bothy. We could walk up Crinkle Crisp Crag Saturday, have a fun night in the Bothy, take up some firewood, have a bit of a camp out, tell a few ghost stories, share a bottle of wine. Oh, it'll be just like my boarding school and scouting days."
"Or 2 bottles,"
smiled Keppel.
"Oh, yes, or 2,
smiled Wilson.
"Sunday morning, if we are up to it. Those that want to can do Hell's Fell Ridge, and then it's back home. I've looked up hiring a minibus to take us up there."
How much each for the minibus?" said JB. He was not worried for himself, but wondered about the cost to young Thomas, and if it would mean counting him out, or embarrassing him by offering to pay for him.
"Oh, nothing at all,"
said Wilson.
"I can get one by my father's company. I'll be insured to drive it too." "Oh, that's ace,"
said Camor, grabbing a big handful of chips from the extra packet Wilson had bought.
"I'm up for that."
"Would you be okay to go, Thomas?" said JB.
Yes, it should be fine,"
he said.
"Will you not need to ask your mummy first?"
said Tonka. JB looked across at her. She's obviously not happy the mood has picked up, thought JB, and she's trying to bring it down again.
Of course I'll ask her, said Thomas, but I think it'll be fine.
Oh, fantastic, said Wilson. And we'll make sure we invite Derek too. Brilliant, said Camor. Can't wait. And Slaggy Both is haunted too, you know.
Is it?
Said Thomas. Don't start with the ghost stories yet, Camor, said JB. Camor laughed.
Ha!
Oh, you're pulling me leg, said Thomas.
The atmosphere was better with people eating and drinking. JB could see Tonka looking from person to person, plotting. He saw her settle on Wilson eating a sausage.
I don't know how you can eat that sausage, brother,
she said. Wilson smiled.
Oh, I do, because it's delicious, he said. You should try it, dear sister. It might put some meat on your bones.
Her eyes flickered at the retort.
Does it not bother you that an animal had to die just for you to enjoy its flesh?
She said.
You could just have easily eaten something else.
Oh, yes, but not delicious, though, he said. And no, it doesn't bother me at all, dear sister. Well, what about you? Said Camor with a straight face. Some vegan you are. You've been eating animal products too.
No, I haven't,
said Tonka indignantly.
Yes, you have, he said. You had some of this salt, didn't you?
On the table was a see-through salt grinder with rock salt in it. It was Himalayan rock salt, and some of the crystals had varying splashes of pink and red.
Yeah, well, what of it?
She said, folding her arms across her chest.
Well, see those red and pink stains in it? To make it taste nicer, they put drops of animal blood in it, he said.
Tonka looked at the salt on the table.
Don't be ridiculous,
she said.
There's no such thing.
There is,
said Camor.
Makes it taste nicer. And you were enjoying it too. I saw you. Did you not think why?
There was a little murmuring from the others, and she looked up at them.
He's joking, right, isn't he?
She said. Wilson pursed his lips.
Oh, you know, dear sister, I think he's right. It does taste different, that salt. So, you're the same animal murderer as me.
He smiled and offered the sausage to her.
Do you want a bite?
She looked at the sausage, and then back at the salt, and her face went pale. People were smiling at the obvious joke, but she was fixated.
What animal was it?
She said, hesitantly, not wanting to know, but unable to stop herself asking. Said Camor, thinking quickly.
Donkey! Yeah, that's what they put in it. It's donkey blood.
No,
she said, her eyes transfixed on the salt with the red and pink stains. There was a little quiet, stifled giggle. She's got to know he's joking, thought JB, looking at her.
Yeah, those poor little donkeys,
said Camor in an exaggerated voice.
Blood, blood, bubbling red blood, oozing blood.
Tonka's mouth was open, and her tongue, that had the offending donkey blood on it, lolled out. Her face was deathly white. JB was about to tell Camor to stop teasing her, but it was too late. Tonka swayed a little forward and back. Her eyes rolled up in her head to show only the white, and then she started to topple backwards. It seemed to happen slowly at first, and then everyone turned to follow her fall, and then it sped up, and the back of her head cracked loudly in the silence off the wooden bench behind. someone screamed, "Ah!" and everyone jumped off their chairs.
"Oh my God, I've killed her!"
shouted Camo.
"I've only gone and killed her!"
JB and Betty, being nearest, were first there and stood over her. Keppel, her boyfriend, appeared at their shoulder.
Is she okay?
He said. JB and Betty moved the chairs out of the way, and the others lifted them further clear.
"Oh my God, how is she?"
said Camo, panicking. JB could see that she was breathing. She looked like she was fast asleep.
"Is she dead?"
said Camo.
"What have I done? Have I killed her?"
Betty looked at JB. "She's okay, I think," said JB. "I think she just fainted."
"Yes, that's what I think," said Betty. "She used to faint a lot as a teenager at school, but it hasn't happened for a while."
JB took his fleece off, folded it up and gently put it under her head. He looked around. "I think she's okay," he said. "I think she just fainted." There was a few sighs around the room, the biggest coming from Camo.
"Thank God for that,"
he said.
"Are you sure she's not dead?"
"No, she's breathing," said JB. "Can someone get a coat or something to put over her to keep her warm until she comes to?"
"I've got one in the car,"
said Camo.
"I'll go and get it."
At the relief she was not dead, they all started to discuss it at once. Camo was back in a few seconds and gave the jacket to Betty, who put it over her.
Caw, did you see her head crack off that wooden bench?
said Keppel.
She's going to have a headache after that.
"Oh, yes,"
said Wilson.
"That made some crack, that."
Camo let out an animal groan.
"Oh. Are you sure she's okay?"
he said. "I think so," said JB. Tonka started to move and opened her eyes.
"She's coming too,"
said Betty.
"Oh, thank God for that,"
said Camo.
Where am I?
said Tonka.
And why am I on the floor?
Just give yourself a minute to come round, said JB. JB looked up at the crowd behind him, looking down. Can someone make her a cup of sweet tea with plenty of sugar in it? He said.
I'll do it,
said Keppel.
I know how she likes it. She doesn't take sugar though.
No, put some in this time, said JB. It's for the shock.
OK, but on your head be it.
Tonka came around quite quickly. JB saw the little smirk she had, enjoying having everyone's undivided attention. He could see it on her face as plain as day, and wondered why no one else seemed to notice.
"How's your head?" said Betty.
My head?
She said. "You banged the back of your head when you fainted," said Betty.
Did I?
said Tonka. JB could see the cogs turning in Tonka's mind as the expression changed on her face.
Oh yes, it does feel sore,
she said. She never knew anything about it until Betty mentioned it, thought JB. She's a crafty one.
"Oh, how do you feel, dear sister?"
said Wilson.
A little groggy,
she said, after rolling her head and pausing for dramatic effect. Might be an idea to get you checked out at the hospital then, said JB, calling her bluff.
Do you think so?
said Tonka, giving JB the eye, wondering at his motive, while at the same time wondering if it suited her schemes to go.
Oh yes,
said Keppel, arriving with the tea.
Best to get you checked out. If you have a bleed on the brain, you could drop dead in your sleep.
Everyone shot Keppel a look.
What?
He said.
It could happen. You hear about it all the time.
Not all the time,
said Camor defensively. He had the pale, haunted look on his face of a man who might be tried for murder yet.
Thanks,
she said, for the first time, taking it seriously.
Oh, we only have our bicycles,
said Wilson.
Do you think you will be able to ride to town?
Don't be silly, Wilson. She can't ride, said Betty.
I'll drive,
said Camor.
No thanks,
said Tonka icily.
You might crash on purpose just to finish me off.
Well,
started Camor, but he could not think what to say. It's okay, I'll take you, said JB. Who do you want to come with you? I'll go, said Betty. The boys can ride the bicycles back. I'm sure it won't be long before we are back. I don't think there will be anything wrong, but it is better to be safe than sorry. We'd better get going then, said JB. 5 of the longest hours of his life later, the 3 of them were still sat in the waiting room at the local hospital. As each hour went past, the nature of the clientele became more sketchy, until, when it was past 12 o'clock, they were into the night people.
Mr. Smith,
said a nurse.
Mr. Smith.
An old man with a heavy amateur-wrapped bandage on his arm got up and went through.
We were here hours before he was,
said Tonka out loud. Shh! They will hear you, said Betty. It doesn't work like that. They prioritise. In a way, it's a good thing. They are not so much concerned about you.
Can we just go now?
Said Tonka.
I feel fine.
We will lose our place in the queue, said JB. We might as well see it through now.
Wake me up when they say my name then,
she said, turning her head on her side and making a pillow of her hands. You can't fall asleep, said JB. You might not wake up, remember? Tonka gave him an evil look, but sat up, dramatically crossed her arms, and let out a childish huff. Just then the entry doors burst open, and 3 young men came noisily in, half laughing, half shouting angrily. 2 of them were propping up and half dragging another between the middle of them. The woman behind the reception desk ran in after them.
You can't come in without signing in,
she said. You what? We told you his name, he said, spitting the words out. Can't you see he needs help immediately? He might have taken something. We don't know. We found him like this. We might all have taken something, sniggered the second helper. He put his free hand up to his mouth and blew past a raised finger. Shh! He sniggered. He looked across at JB, who caught his eye. Shh! He said, across to JB as if he was a co-conspirator. The angry man smiled and laughed, and then went back to his forced angry man routine. Can't you see he needs help? He said. Help! Help! He shouted. A doctor and a nurse came out from behind a curtain. What's going on here? Said the doctor. Our friend here needs immediate help, said the angry man. We found him like this. we think he might have taken something, but we're not sure, like. The doctor looked at the middle man and went across. Hello? Can you hear me? Can you tell me your name? Said the doctor.
His name's Neil, but we call him Pringle, said the angry man,
half shoving his friend forward. The doctor looked exasperated at the angry man, stood up straight and put his fists on his hips.
It's your job to take him, said the angry man.
We'll take him, said the doctor in a flat voice. Orderly! Orderly! An older man came from behind the curtain. Could you take this man, orderly? Said the doctor. The orderly walked forward.
We can carry him,
said the angry man with a sudden innocent voice. No, you are not allowed beyond that curtain, said the doctor.
All right, please yourself,
said the angry man, angry again. The orderly took the half-dead body into his physical possession in a practiced way, like he was just putting on a coat, turned and walked off with him.
Give him the best treatment, mind,
said the angry man to the back of the doctor.
We'll be waiting here for him.
The doctor stopped. Of course, you are free to wait for your friend just like anyone else, said the doctor. And just like anyone else, if you do not behave, security will escort you off the premises.
Yes, Your Honour,
said the angry man in a fake docile voice. He gave the doctor a curtsy just for added effect. The doctor turned, happy to be away from him. The angry one tapped the other and they came to sit down. They sat opposite three people, an older woman and her husband and a young man in his 20s. The angry man quietly took in the scene, looking everyone up and down directly, while they all looked anywhere else, trying not to meet his gaze. The giggler started to get restless in his chair.
How long are we going to wait for him, Sid? He said.
I need a smoke, you know. In a minute, Brucey, said Sid. I'm just taking the scene in here.
He said it like those people couldn't hear him, and they in turn acted like they hadn't heard. Brucey became more agitated and fidgeted in his chair.
I need a smoke, Sid. I really need a smoke.
You know,
I need a smoke, Sid,
he said.
I really need one, you know.
Sid looked around and came to a decision.
So have a smoke then, Brucey,
he said.
What, here?
Said Brucey.
Why not? I'm sure these nice folks won't object,
said Sid out of the side of his mouth, without taking his eyes off the people in front of him.
Are you sure?
Said Brucey.
Sure, I'm sure, said Sid. Go ahead.
Give us me papers then,
said Brucey. Sid put his hand inside his jacket and pulled out a rolled up bag with an elastic band on. Brucey took the bag and took the elastic band off. JB had kept an eye on the whole thing out of the corner of his eye. If anything was going to happen, it looked like it would fall to him. For a moment he wondered if they carried knives. He wondered if they bit him, would he get hepatitis or AIDS? Then he closed all that off in his mind.
I can't do it, Sid,
said Brucey.
My hands are too shaky.
You can't smoke in here,
said Tonka, leaning forward and then sitting back, her leg bobbing up and down. JB sighed inside.
Is that right, little lady?
Said Sid, looking down the row at her. He looked across at the people opposite, weighing them up.
My friend here, Mr. Brucey like. My friend here needs a hand,
he said to the older man opposite.
You'll help a mate out, won't you?
said the man, glancing at his wife.
You don't need the missus' permission now, do you, my mate? He said. Brucey, give him your baccy to hold.
Sure, Sid,
said Brucey, quietly laughing. The man took the baccy pouch, went to glance at his wife, and stopped himself.
Here, you can help as well, missus,
said Sid.
You can hold the ciggy paper.
The older lady held the cigarette paper, her hand shaking slightly. The young man went to get up while they were occupied.
Hey, where are you going, my friend?
Said Sid.
Just to the toilet,
he said, scared.
Well now,
said Sid.
And I thought we were all friends. Can't you help a mate out? I thought you were going to spread the tobacco out for our friend Brucey here. You see, he's got the shakes and can't do it himself, see?
Reluctantly, the young man sat back down. Sid took the cigarette paper and passed it to the young man.
Now just spread that tobacco into a nice thin even line, young fella, and try not to spill any of Bruce's tobacco. It's precious to him, it is.
The young man spread the tobacco out with shaking hands. Sid reached forward and dropped along the length an extra ingredient, and Brucey rubbed his hands together, laughed, and licked his lips.
Well now, that's a good attempt, said Sid, smiling at the young man. Is it your first go?
Yeah, he said, shaking a little.
Excellent,
said Sid, taking the cigarette and rolling it tight and straight expertly between his fingers. The young man smiled, relieved, thinking he might not be attacked now, having done what he was asked to do.
Now then,
said Sid,
as we are all smoking together, they can't kick us all out now, can they?
The smile dropped from the young man's face. The older couple were trying to sink into their chairs and disappear.
Huh,
huffed Tonka, looking away, her leg bobbing. Sid tapped Brucey on the leg.
Now, all we need is the rest of our mates here to help by licking the paper and lighting our little ciggy,
said Sid. He got up, Brucey following him, and they sat on the chairs opposite JB, Betty and Tonka. JB felt his heart start to race, and then he turned it to ice. Tonka was looking away, her leg bobbing. Brucey looked at her shapely legs and tapped Sid, nodding at them. Sid smiled.
Now then, who's going to lick our ciggy paper?
said Sid. He looked at the three of them. Tonka had her arms folded and was looking away. Betty was sat there looking down. Sid smiled at her, with her head down, looking meek. He turned to JB for the first time. JB knew what he was thinking. If he could dominate him, Sid and Brucey could freely mess with the girls. JB was staring straight at him, keeping a watch also on Brucey, out of the corner of his eye. For a split second, Sid's eye glazed over at the force of JB's look. Sid looked him up and down, obviously making a mental calculation of what he thought JB's strength was in comparison to his and Bruce's. Sid smiled an evil smile at the result of his calculation. He held out the rolled up cigarette to JB.
Lick that ciggy for us, will you, my mate?
Said Sid, smiling a big fake smile, like the wolf in Little Red Riding Hood. JB thought of a long, aggressive answer, but simply said, "No," in a flat, cold voice. Sid slowly let his anger build on his face.
I said, lick it,
he said, trying his most intimidating voice. JB looked straight at him and smiled, like what he said meant nothing. What are you looking at? He said. JB made him wait a moment. A piece of shit, he said. Sid tried to outstir him. Is that right? Said Sid. For the first time, his confidence wavered. JB did not speak, just readied himself.
Well, there's no need for that kind of talk,
said Tonka. You be silent, said JB in a quiet voice. If I'm the one fighting, I'm the one talking. Tonka drew a breath and then stopped herself.
Who said anything about fighting?
Said Sid. His manner was suddenly conciliatory. JB raised his readiness and kept his eyes locked on him. Brucey had suddenly sobered up and was slowly getting up. He was going to try to sneak behind the back of JB. If he leaves my eye line, said JB to Sid, I'm going to stomp on your head. Sid looked at him and saw the resolution. Hang on a minute there, Brucey, said Sid. Sid suddenly changed tack, rolled his head around, breaking eye contact, and started fake laughing. Then he held his hand for JB to shake, like they were long-term best buddies.
Okay, friend, let's shake on it,
said Sid. JB just stared directly at him, ignoring the hand.
Okay,
said Sid, trying to gather his dignity.
Come on, Brucey, let's go share this ciggy our good friends here made for us.
JB watched them go out of his side eye.
Have we got enough between us for a kebab?
Said Brucey as they went through the doors.
I'm starving.
It was quiet for a few moments, and then the air in the room seemed to relax a little. The older couple and the young man glanced at the closed door, picturing in their minds it bursting open and the pair of them coming running through. JB thought that they would not be back. They had tried punking them to get their fun and their way, but were not actually brave enough to take on a challenge they might not win. Still, he would keep one eye on the door for the rest of the time they were there, and be careful on the walk back to the car. A nurse came through the door.
Tonka Beak! Tonka Beak!
She said.
At last!
Said Tonka, getting up. When she was gone, the others gradually started to relax. The young lad looked at him.
Do you think it'll be okay to go to the toilet now?
He said. Yeah, I think you'll be fine, said JB. I'll keep an eye out. He smiled and nodded and went to the bathroom. The older couple laughed nervously.
Well, that was an experience,
said the man.
I've come to Casualty to get fixed up, not beat up.
Yeah, smiled JB. When it was quiet, Betty whispered to him. How did you know they would back down and not do anything? She said. I didn't, he said. Oh, she said, shocked. With people like that, though, you have to let them know you're prepared to go all the way, he said. She looked uncomfortable, her mind trying to process what had happened. Maybe an experience of a real fear will help her with some of her imaginary ones, thought JB. 5 minutes later, Tonka came striding back out. That was quick, said Betty.
Apparently I'm fine,
said an exasperated Tonka.
Just a little pale and anemic. He says my iron count is a little low, and he recommends iron tablets.
Betty and JB did not say anything about her vegan diet, thinking she would not want to hear it at the moment.
5 hours in the company of the dregs of society for that,
said Tonka. Thanks, said JB sarcastically. A little laugh escaped Betty before she could control it.
Going on now,
said Tonka, refusing to acknowledge the joke. JB drove them back. The two girls sat on the back seat, hardly talking as they were so tired. When they arrived, Tonka got out, shut the door and walked off. Thanks for taking us, and for waiting, said Betty before getting out. I'm glad you were there when those two idiots came in. I don't know what we would have done if we would have been there on our own. No problem, he said. She smiled, a very nice smile. Well, thanks again, she said. She shut the door and hurried in out of the cold night air.